All right. Welcome back, everybody, to House Energy Digital Infrastructure. It's Thursday, February 12th, and we are here with JFO to talk about the FY27 budget, specifically the Agency of Digital Services changes. And so we're learning about this as we prepare to write our letter to House of Pros. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Oh, Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Gareth Torrey, Washington 2.
Larissa Billy, Wyndham 2.
Amy Perry, Finner Crassen Group.
Lisa Goffin, JFO.
Great. All right. For the record.
For the record, James Duffy, Direct Fiscal Office. And Madam Chair, I wanted to start off my testimony by quickly checking in with the committee and deferring to you on what is most useful to hear from JFO today. I was here for most of Commissioner Gresham's testimony yesterday. I caught up on what happened after I left the room in the recording. As I understand it, I think the committee may be looking to hear from JFO on kind of our professional assessment of the proposed fiscal year 27 changes,
Yes.
right? Those kind of structural changes that ADS and Finance and Management have worked together on. And perhaps there may be more specific questions about the FY27 budget once you subtract out those changes. But I wanted to do a temperature check with you, Madam Chair, about what's of most interest to you from JFO today.
Well, mostly I think, as a committee, we really need to weigh in, I think, on what we think about the changes. So we need to make sure we understand the changes. And I think most importantly, we need to make sure we understand their potential impact, right? So, there's a lot of moving of the money around and, moving stuff to different buckets. And I think our role here is to say, we see that this is happening. We understand, why it's happening. Here are the pros, here are the cons, and here's what we think we need to look out for. Like, this part's good, this part we're concerned about. And how it will impact our job as legislators in providing oversight of IT spending, especially on the big ticket projects. Did I miss anything? Do I need to poke you with a chopstick?
You could step on my foot.
Right.
Yeah.
On your foot. Go ahead, Representative.
I think that was perfect, Madam Chair. I would just put a finer point on something that I am hoping to get a better clarity on, and I'm not sure we had better clarity on this last year, but it feels very important, which is how much money is the governor proposing this year in the budget for IT projects like CWIS, so and that's not something I think that was presented to us in, last year, but it does feel like something that's important. So I would just put that as a aside to what I think the chair said beautifully.
Yes, and I will add to your beautiful thought, which is that it is an aside in the sense that I don't think it's our role or it's beyond probably the scope of our budget memo to try to find every piece of IT spending across every state agency and department and see whether it's gone up or down and comment on that. However, what Rep. Sebelius is pointing out that's really important is that right now, our EPMO dashboard, which is a really important oversight tool for us, tracks here's what the project is supposed to cost overall. Here's where we are overall. But it doesn't say, and here's what's in the FY27 budget for that project this year. And so the reason that is important just for us to know, maybe going forward for future, is we can see from our EPMO dashboard how important the CWIS project is. We can see at the 50,000 foot level, wow, and I'm now making this up, but wow, this or that project was supposed to cost this, but it's going to cost that over time, and over 5 years, it was supposed to take 5, but now it's going to take 7. What we can't see is, wait, in the context of that, how come there's no money for that in the budget this year? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So I hear both of those concerns. So one is, how can you all get the information you need and making sure you have the information you need to comment on these proposed structural reforms
Yeah.
in FY27. Additionally, getting a handle on funds proposed in FY27 for major IT projects.
Okay, that is it.
Great. I can say I'm well prepared to speak to the first category today, Representative Sibilia. I would want to do a little more digging into the FY27 GovRec before I provide anything in testimony on that. What I can say is there aren't as many proposed one-time expenditures in the FY27 budget as that we've seen in recent years. I'm not aware of any major, on the scale of the IT modernization fund, for example, any major new one-time proposals related to tech IT upgrade projects. Now, to say there aren't any, but I'm not remembering any off the top of my head. There are things within departmental bases, right, and prior year appropriations, continuing execution of projects from prior year appropriations that I'm sure would be of interest to you.
So
And perhaps also in the FY27 basis, excuse me.
I would just note, since the formation of ADS, which I strongly supported, I have been asking every subsequent secretary about a sustainable funding mechanism for IT. And were it not for, COVID and all of the other tragic things that have befallen us and the federal dollars that came, I cannot imagine where our IT would be now. And so I think we as the legislature have an obligation to understand what we are prioritizing in terms of modernizing our IT. I personally do not think that that is a one time when we get a chance. I think we have to have a funding plan, which is we're far away from, but this information could be helpful to us. Thank you very much. I'll be right back.
And on that note,
Great. Well, what I can tell you all as a top line is that the Joint Fiscal Office has met with finance and management. We've spoken with Agency of Administration. We've spoken with ADS as well, and been, tuning into their testimony to various committees of jurisdiction. The changes that are being proposed for fiscal year 27 are credible to joint fiscal and make sense to us from the perspective of bringing deficits within the CIT fund, within the ADS funding mechanisms under control. I recognize that it's a lot. It's kind of a thicket to work through, but I'm happy to go through each of them individually today, and each of them individually in our conversations, joint fiscal conversations with the administration. They make sense, and you all heard from Commissioner Gresham yesterday, as forms of more precise, more clarity in the financial controls that are applied to the administration of kind of these routine IT functions across the government.
So if I understood Commissioner Gresham's testimony, and that fund has been getting a roughly $10 million hit for 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, right? So, and we didn't seem to get much clarity on what that $10 million consists of. We asked a few times in different ways, and it troubled me that there was this lack of clarity in our systems that we couldn't identify $10 million annually. Like, this is, now if this was $10,000, I might not be concerned, but there was no real information on what that $10 million consisted of year after year after year. Do you have any more insight into that than we got yesterday?
Representative, I'm afraid I do not. Commissioner Gresham, ADS, I know they've been working hard on this, and they are starting to pull apart the strings to get a clearer picture. From Joint Fiscal Office's point of view, we speak with them, we corroborate what the information they share to the extent we can. They have the best visibility into their own systems of anybody in state government. And so I cannot offer more clarity on the deficit drivers in the CIT fund beyond, what the best postulates out of the executive branch are. I wish I could for you, but I know with the information that has been highlighted and then like the most probable deficit drivers that have been highlighted by the administration. I agree that those make sense. There are a couple, right? Not billing for work that the agency is doing, right? Not having work that the agency is performing incorporated within the core enterprise services. A conversation about the rates at which ADS professionals bill out their time is certainly another piece of the puzzle. Accurately accounting for the hours that they spend on different tasks and making sure that they're billing both for all the hours that they perform, as well as getting adequately compensated to bill for those costs. I think the universe is fairly, there are good ideas as to what the universe of deficit drivers are. I can't say definitively with any more clarity than finance and management again.
On that specific point, the specific point about the hourly rate, why is that rate seem to be frozen in amber? Why has that not been able to be adjusted with inflation? It's been the same rate, and I understand it for, I don't know, a long time.
My understanding is that the rates are about 6 to 8 years old. I can't say why they haven't been changed. I'm not in a position to speak to that. Yeah. I can tell you that ultimately, what I've been told in conversations with the finance and management is ultimately rate setting authority rests with the agency of administration. I know finance and management also plays a key role in facilitating communication, right, between the agency of administration and ADS. But I can't speak to why the rates haven't been adjusted.
It's an administrative role to make that adjustment.
That's correct. That authority rests within the executive branch. My understanding is specifically it's with the agency of administration.
Okay. Well, I think
That's the answer. Okay. Rep. Marm?
All we have here. Would you say that the IT systems of finance and management are robust enough to give proper clarity and ability to manage state funds? I'll just leave it there.
That's a big question, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to say that, but I would say finance and management does a very good job. I haven't worked in their systems myself, but I don't feel like I'm in a position to comment on the quality of their internal controls. But I would say we run a pretty tight ship in Vermont, right? We have a balanced budget each year. There are problem areas like the IT fund, but joint fiscal works closely with finance and management, and we get the information we need from them reliably.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have are we just totally interrupting you? Have we dragged you off track?
A little bit, but that's okay.
Okay, let's
It could be a
go
conversation.
forward.
Sure.
Okay.
So I wanted to see if there would be any utility for our conversation today talking about internal service funds in a more general sense before we dive into some of the changes being made to internal service funds.
Yeah, let's do that. We've got until 10:45. So
Okay. I think that's good. So internal service funds, you heard from Commissioner Gresham 2 days ago. These are funds within state government that support entities that might not serve the public directly, but they service the agencies that do serve the public directly, right? So human resources, integral part of the operations of state government. It's mostly on the back end things, right? It serves departments and agencies. Same with IT. The provision of IT services is something that enables the work of the other public-facing agencies and departments that the public doesn't necessarily have front-end exposure to. Internal service funds are one of the ways that state governments fund that work. They allow for the spreading of costs for those functions, for human resources, for example, for building space, for IT, across the various components of state government. They do this by billing back to the respective agencies and departments, right? So every year, ADS sends a bill to Agency of Natural Resources, Agency of Administration, what have you. Those agencies then pay the bill to support the work that ADS does to administer IT in state government. This brings us to the idea of duplicated spending authority, which I know it always raises hackles because it sounds like we're spending money twice. We're not. the way an internal service fund appears in the state budget, and if you've ever noticed at the bottom of the state budget where you see the grand total, right? Like maybe our total state budget is 9.3, but the duplicated state budget is something like 15. I'm just making up numbers, but the duplicated state budget, the total budget, is often larger than the unduplicated budget. That's because the way we track the way money moves through internal service funds is first, the spending authority is given to the agency. Let's stick with Agency of Digital Services. Spending authority is given to the Agency of Digital Services, right? Agency of Digital Services, you're authorized to collect this much money from the various agencies and departments this year based on what we think you're going to have to do for them, the costs you're going to incur in serving those agencies. Then that amount is nested within the base budgets of all those other agencies. So when A&R presents its budget to House Appropriations, included in their budget is what they're going to have to pay to ADS for IT services that year. ADS also has their own separate item in the budget so that we can all have visibility into how much money they're going to spend. But the ADS budget, it really, 90% of it, and more than 90, consists of the agency, the money they receive from other agencies and departments. I'll stop. Yeah.
So in the budget, the same number appears twice, but for ADS, it's spending authority. And for the agency, this is how much money you have to pay the bill.
It's spending authority for everybody. When we're talking about appropriation, we're always talking about spending authority. We're not really talking about actual, dollars moving between accounts. It's authority to expend money for a given purpose. But we can give dual spending authority to both ADS and the agency that's paying for ADS's services.
Okay, so it's not taking away what I said about the actual money. The spending authority for the same amount is going to show up at ADS and like A&R. I made that.
Yeah, let's say you, for example, if you wanted to add up all of the ADS expenditures across all the departments and agencies for fiscal year 27, that would roughly equal the balance of the CIT fund, right? I'm getting ahead of myself, but that would roughly equal the spending authority given to ADS in their internal service fund that year, right? The sum of all IT expenditures to ADS for a given year is equal to the spending authority that ADS has for that given year.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you help me understand the dual spending authority?
Yes, all it really means is,
Why we had it and why it should go away.
so dual spending authority is not going away. It's not going away under the FY27 proposal. There are some changes I'll get to. We're going to, for example, increase the amount of internal service funds that ADS uses to administer their work. I think there are good reasons for that. But those also represent dual spending authority. And this is a common way of conducting business in state government, right? In no way is Vermont the minority, right, in state governments for running their IT department this way. To answer your question about why it's done this way, it's a cost accounting mechanism that allows us to spread IT costs rationally across state government. Maybe we want some things to be paid for roughly equally by every department and agency. Other things, it makes more sense for an agency to just be the only payer because they're the only user of that component. Having an internal service fund allows us to have a more informed, rational conversation about how we distribute those costs.
Okay. And so I heard you say it's not going away, but I don't think that's what
It's not what we heard yesterday.
Commissioner Gresham said.
May I ask a follow-up question, Sharon? Just to
just
question.
yeah.
Sure. From your conversation with Commissioner Gresham, what is your understanding of what's going away in the FY27 budget?
I will tell you that I am I'm going to be very careful here. I'm going to tell you that I'm not really clear.
Okay.
And I'm trying to understand. And I found that to be confusing, which is why I'm asking you about it. And I'm trying to visualize this in my head, like what's happening here so that I can make sense of it. That spreading costs across is very helpful, but the I still can't make sense of what Commissioner Gresham said.
I have a thought. Can I say what I think? Because what if I'm right? Oh my God. This construct of dual spending authority showing up in two places,
Mhm.
that is not going away. What is changing is who has the final say and who pays the bill.
I think what we're circling
Are we
here
getting,
is the
are we mixing
specific
up two things?
change to the bespoke build back mechanism,
correct?
which is part of the changes, one of the changes being made, but there are others. And I think what might be most helpful is the next thing I wanted to
So let me
discuss
keep going,
were
yeah.
the changes to the internal service fund structure. And I
Okay.
think this will be helpful.
Because we might just be getting hung up. To me, who decides who pays the bill? Why it's spending authority. So we might be mixing up.
And I think it's a matter of definitions. too.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to stop.
But Representative, I
Go
hear
on.
your question. I'm going to get there.
We
I'm
have
going
to
to
move
endeavor
forward.
to get there.
Yes.
So currently, we just covered what internal service funds are, how they work. Currently, there is just one internal service fund that pays for ADS's work. That is the Communications and Information Technology Fund, CIT fund. And you all may remember that ADS uses different mechanisms of billing agencies for the work that they do. One is core enterprise services. That is where you divide all of these shared foundational IT expenses equally, roughly based on headcount across all of state government. There are others that are based on demand. So instead of being spread equally across state government, what agencies are billed is based on how much they consume. This is where we start to talk about things like service level agreement, SLA, timesheets, telephony,
Yes.
and bespoke, all of which you've heard. Those are individual components under demand-based billing. Currently, all of those bill back mechanisms ultimately route money back to the CIT fund. It's the one internal service fund utilized by ADS. One change being proposed in FY27 is that rather than having one internal service fund, the CIT fund, ADS will instead administer 4. And each of those 4 internal service funds will be specifically for what's currently a bill back mechanism, right? So there will be an internal service fund for CES, that will be the CIT fund. There will be an internal service fund for SLA, an internal service fund for bespoke, and an internal service fund for, I apologize, one is escaping me, bespoke, SLA, and timesheet. So there will now be 4 instead of 1.
They all have different names now.
They do. I'm making a deliberate
That's a
decision to
bummer.
not use their new names
Thank
just
you.
for the time being. And the reason behind that change, and I think when I first saw this, I thought, whoa, okay, why are we increasing the number of funds? This seems like we're increasing the level of complexity in a system that's already complex. Why would you multiply the internal service funds you're using to support ADS's work? I understand it now, and it makes sense to me. As it is now, there are different bill back mechanisms that route money to the internal service fund. And each of those bill back mechanisms might have its own specific set of problems, right? Might be contributing to these deficits or this underbilling at ADS in its own unique way. And they are separable, right? The bill back mechanisms, the money that ADS receives is separable by the bill back mechanisms. But it's not always super visible to you all as legislators or even to JFO, anybody external to ADS. It's not immediately clear how much money was collected via these different bill back mechanisms in a given year under the current system. ADS can tell us, but we go to them, we ask them to provide that information. It's not immediately clear. When we have separate internal service funds, each of which are just receiving a funding stream that represents a different bill back mechanism, now that's a new level of visibility. I, JFO, you all, I on behalf of you all, can much more easily look at the operating statement for a specific internal service fund and say, oh, okay, there's a cash flow problem in just randomly in the timesheet internal service fund, but not as much of a cash flow problem or no cash flow problem in this other one. And so it allows me to zero in on a specific bill back mechanism and separate. I think the metaphor that Commissioner Gresham was using 2 days ago was the funny colors in the pool, right?
Mhm.
If I'm trying to figure out like which build-back mechanism is contributing red and which one is contributing blue and which one is contributing green to the pool. Much easier to do if I have get different internal service funds to look at, as opposed to these build-back mechanisms all nested within one internal service fund. Is that
Yeah.
clear enough?
Yes,
Yeah.
no, it is clear
Okay.
enough. It is clear enough.
So that is the first change. And I addressed that one first because it flows kind of naturally from our previous conversation about how internal service funds work. I'm going to step away from that conversation, from that topic, and move on to, I think, the next change that's of most interest to you all, which is the new general fund appropriation.
Yes,
If that sounds good to you, Madam Chair.
yes,
Okay.
please.
So currently, ADS is almost entirely a bill-back funded agency. I think they have about a $230,000 general fund appropriation every year to fund the Vermont Center for Geographic Information Studies. But for a long time, that's been the only general fund appropriation that supports work at ADS. However, we know that there are issues with the bill-back mechanisms that ADS uses. Specifically, they're not collecting enough money to cover the work that they're doing through these bill-back mechanisms. Part of the reason for that is ADS is increasingly taking on roles that aren't easily divisible among different units of state government. You heard about some of these already from Commissioner Gresham. Cybersecurity. Every year, there are ever increasing demands to maintain compliance with cybersecurity requirements and cybersecurity best practices. Data governance, data storage, maybe not data storage, it's maybe more SLA. AI, ADS is increasingly getting involved with helping to develop policies and governance structures for the use of AI across state government. Similar to CES, core enterprise services, those are costs that aren't they're not easily allocable to individual entities. It doesn't make sense to bill back one specific agency or even to spread that cost evenly across all the agencies. So the proposal for FY27 is that going forward, ADS will receive for this year, it's proposed to be a $9.08 million increase in their general fund appropriation to cover that kind of work. And that's expected to be recurring general fund appropriation going into the future. And so you'll see this in the budget documents as a $9.08 million increase for FY27. The total general fund appropriation to ADS will be something like 9.3 million, right? Because you're taking that little pot of money for the GIS center and this 9 million for these other costs. Currently, what you'll hear from ADS and finance and management is that these are costs that just aren't being recovered, which is one of the drivers behind deficits in the CIT fund. And that's looking to be addressed through the changes proposed in FY27. So pro of that is currently there's work that ADS is doing that's just not getting paid for, and that contributes to the CIT fund deficits. Not a great way fiscally to run a state agency, right? We want to have visibility into all the costs we're incurring. We want to be paying for those costs fractionally. I think one drawback or one con, or just a trade-off rather to highlight for you all about that, is that we're now introducing a new recurring $9 million pressure on the general fund going into future fiscal years, beginning in FY27. Now, I think there are good reasons for you all to consider doing that, but it does represent a new pressure on the general fund.
That's helpful too. So that's just new money. It's a new base appropriation. It wasn't shifted from somewhere else.
Nope, this is new. And so this brings ADS from a 99% bill-back funded agency to a 90% bill-back funded agency with about 10% of their costs now being covered by a recurring general fund appropriation. And just to be crystal clear, ADS has always been more or less funded by the general fund, because you start in the general fund, the money goes to the agencies, and then it goes to ADS to pay for the work. So to be just put the finest point on it, they've always been general fund funded, but now we're talking about a direct general fund appropriation to
Right.
ADS,
Here's your money for the work that you haven't been able to charge for.
essentially.
Mhm.
I think we're really making progress. Let's keep going.
Good. So glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that represents a new pressure on the general fund. Additionally, while we're on the topic of, pivot to a different topic rather. We've talked about the division of the CIT fund into 4 internal service funds total. We've talked about the new $9 million general fund recurring appropriation, direct appropriation. I also want to talk about a change occurring within core enterprise services, rather, CES. I want to do this one next because I think CES, if I'm reading the room right, we have a good grasp of CES. These are the foundational costs. We spread them out on a headcount basis across state government, more or less. There are changes occurring within the CES calculation methodology proposed for FY27. And let me think about how I want to frame this. The end result of that is the CES is increasing as a share of the bill back mechanisms of like how ADS recoups its money. Currently, core enterprise services uses a headcount basis for billing agencies, right? You've got 100 people. We're going to charge you whatever we think the divisible cost of core enterprise services is. We're going to charge you that times 100. What you heard a little bit from Commissioner Gresham about 2 days ago is that there's now increasing recognition that there are really different tiers of core service usage among people within state government. And the whole idea about core enterprise services in the first place was that it would, increase fairness and rationality in how we distribute costs among state government. And it does that by doing it more or less equally. But then you have folks like park rangers at FPR, you have corrections officers at DOC, whose usage of many core IT functions is of a lower intensity than folks who are doing intense financial modeling at DFR, or someone like me who sits all day at my desk and does lots of spreadsheeting and all that kind of thing. You have folks who might spend most of their day outside or not at their desk, who really just need an email address and some login credentials for VTHR, that kind of thing. Does it make sense for my CES cost to be the same as someone as a game warden or a correctional officer? Probably not. And so ADS, Finance and Management, the administration is proposing in FY27 to move from a headcount basis for core enterprise services to a user count basis. And what that means is user count will, there will still be like the lowest tier, right? The base tier that's kind of currently already used for CES costs, and a higher tier where an agency is paying more for that person because that person had higher utilization of those core services. And I don't have the number.
Tiers?
2 tiers. Okay. Yeah. Currently there's just one. It's headcount based. Now there's going to be 2. It's user count based. I don't believe I have in my notes what those rates are like per person, but that's the core of what they're changing within the CES methodology and what they're proposing to change in FY27.
Okay.
Another thing that should hopefully help ADS more accurately, more wholesomely recover costs that they're incurring, right? And to spread costs out more rationally across different folks in state government. I'm sure any questions or thoughts on
No,
that?
that's forged.
Okay. Additionally, within CES, Finance and Management ADS are proposing to continue moving costs currently under SLA into CES. You all remember this from last year when an appropriation of $15 million was made to help move costs from SLA, that billing in arrears credit card bill back mechanism, to core enterprise services. My understanding is that work is continuing this year. And those are the 2 reasons that you see CES growing as a share of ADS cost recovery. They're changing the methodology a bit with the user count piece, and they're continuing to move costs from SLA to CES. So you're seeing SLA go down, I believe, by 6 million or so this year, and you're seeing CES go up.
By the same amount? No.
No, no, which was my
okay.
question too. I was like, oh, so it should be 1-to-1. I don't believe it's a 1-to-1 change. I think actually the increase in CES is greater than the corresponding decrease in SLA. Part of that is changes being made to the methodology. Part of it may also be related to more accurately capturing services that are not currently being billed for. I'm not 100% sure on the specifics there, but to answer your question, no, it's not a 1-to-1 increase decrease between SLA and CES.
Okay.
CES is also an internal services fund, is it not?
Currently, under the current status quo, it's one of the build back mechanisms within the single service, internal service fund that ADS uses.
Right, CIT.
Exactly, the CIT fund. Under the piece.
So what is going to be called CIT? What is that?
CIT
What's
fund will
left?
continue to
What's
exist.
left in CIT?
It will be the home for core enterprise services.
Oh. What else is there besides core enterprise?
So, and again, I'm sticking to the old names just to avoid unnecessary confusion, but there's SLA, right? Which service level agreements.
No, that's right. That's right. We saw that yesterday.
Yep.
Uh,
That is that billing in arrears for hardware, software, that kind of thing, bill back mechanism.
so my notes from yesterday, which may be wrong, indicated that Enterprise Offerings Fund was formerly SLA. That's not correct.
I believe that's correct.
But
The Enterprise Offerings Fund is the new name for SLA. That's right. And I'm deliberately using the old names, but to avoid confusion, but I think I'm just creating confusion.
No, that's fine. But what I'm confused about is you're saying that CES, which is indicated as a separate fund, and I'm looking at Commissioner Gresham's slide from yesterday, which includes $45 million. 9 of it is general fund and 36 of it is CIT. That's separate from his listing about enterprise offerings fund, which is formerly SLA. So you just said, I think, that SLA was included in CES, core enterprise services.
I agree.
If I did, that was not my intent. So currently, the proposal is there will be four internal service funds instead of one, each of which will be the new home for each of those individual bill back mechanisms. And CIT fund will be the home just for CES. The professional resourcing fund will be the home for we currently call SLA.
Timesheet. Professional resourcing is time.
Oh, you're right.
Enterprise offerings is SLA.
You're correct. Yeah,
Enterprise services was bespoke.
that's good. Yeah.
So what's left in CES? Correct.
What's left in CES is what's currently in CES. So those foundational, equally spread across state government costs, like domains, internet, basic internet connectivity, that kind of thing. And cybersecurity is another piece of that. Yes. So the CES, and then there are some changes to the underlying methodology of how the CES per headcount cost is calculated are changing, but CES is, I'm going to say, relatively untouched. They're tinkering with it, but it's the same conceptual idea, and it's remaining within the CIT fund.
Basic IT services, everybody in state government.
Correct.
At one level or another, at either basic tier or whatever, what's the higher tier called? Is there a name for it?
There might be. I do not have it.
If you didn't say it, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull it. Okay.
And I'm not sure how much we need to understand the GG names.
No, we don't. I just thought you might have mentioned it today. That's all. Because I'm writing down.
How are we doing on time check?
We have until 10:45.
We do. And Lisa, are you going to be, because we wanted to talk to you about standards and stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay, I think now we can. We should talk about the changes to bespoke.
yes,
I know that that's a topic that's of interest. I'm just making sure in my notes. Yeah, so we've discussed the major changes I wanted to get to, with the exception of bespoke. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
So bespoke is one of the build-back mechanisms currently utilized by ADS. It encompasses many of the large-scale IT projects that you all are interested in. It represents a way for ADS under the current status quo to bill agencies for its work for large-scale projects. Putting together bids, putting projects out to bid, managing contracts for these large-scale, one-time, customized projects. 2 changes happening with that, or perhaps more, but I'll go through them one by one. Internal Service Fund is being established to house bespoke, right? That's going to be called the Customized Services Fund. We've already talked about that. Additionally, the vast majority of costs currently encompassed in bespoke are being moved outside of ADS's spending authority and out to the sponsoring agencies. So instead of the spending authority for, I'm trying to think of a theoretical example. I shouldn't speculate, but instead of having the spending, let's say you have a $15 million IT upgrade. In the past, $15 million spending authority would have lived with ADS through the bespoke build-back mechanism. Under the proposed changes, now, let's say AHS is the sponsoring agency. That $15 million spending authority will live with AHS. ADS will still perform all of the contract management, project management, bidding, the professional services of managing a large IT project will continue to live with ADS. They'll continue to provide that professional service, but the actual act of paying the bills to the vendors for that project will now live with the sponsoring agencies. So in this made-up example, it would be AHS.
Yep. Yes.
So is this changing budgets, either ADS or the agencies and departments?
As a result of this change, you're seeing ADS's total budget go down by, I want to say, about 45 million this year. 47 million. But that expenditure, so to answer your question, yes, it is changing budget. It's not changing the amount of money that's spent across state government, but it is moving significant amount of money, 47 million, from ADS to these projects sponsoring agencies.
So is it increasing the sponsor budgets?
Yes. This is a one-to-one. This, unlike the previous example, right? This would be a one-to-one change. You're taking.
I just want to say, I'm
You're
so
taking
grateful for
ADS.
this testimony.
This is a transformational testament.
I'm sure
Wow.
ADS is listening, and I'm probably getting some of the finer points wrong, but I'm glad it's helpful, and this is.
Well, it's taking it out of the duplicative authority situation and putting it into a single authority situation.
There's still, I would say, there's still a dual role to be
Well,
played.
a dual role.
Yeah,
But the spending authority is
presumably
is now only with the agency, not with ADS.
correct. The spending authority for a big IT project would now be with whatever agency is undertaking that project.
Rip, Tori?
Yeah, just a quick question for you. So the project management role that ADS still serves is going to be in the CES, not.
I listened to Commissioner Gresham's testimony after I left the room 2 days ago, and I heard his testimony to that effect, that some of these professional services for project management would be billed out through CES. I have some questions as well about like how that is billed for, because I could see it foreseeably being rationally attributed to maybe it's. Anyway, my understanding from Commissioner Gresham's testimony is that the core enterprise services will absorb many of those project management costs. I don't know if it's 100% of those project management costs or not, but the expectation from Commissioner Gresham's testimony is it will be a CES cost.
Rip Southworth?
So trying to make it a little clearer, it's changing the financial responsibility for that money, but not changing the oversight of the project.
I'm hesitant to say that there will be no oversight function performed by the sponsoring agencies because, as the agency that's doing
Right.
it, but
overall,
yes,
ADS
that's
is
true.
the oversight.
ADS will be providing their own unique kind of IT professional perspective on overseeing the project, managing it, and the actual act of paying the bill
Will go
to the vendors goes to the sponsoring agency. I'm just going to make quick eye contact with Lisa Gobbin, our IT consultant in the room, because Lisa has some expertise in project management that I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
In what I'm going to talk to them about, I cover that.
Okay.
All right, let's make sure it,
It's 10:37. Yeah, I think you probably heard enough from me. I want to leave enough time for
Great.
Lisa to testify.
that was super helpful.
Good. And I will be in touch too about any additional follow-up infographics, written testimony that might be helpful to you all. Madam
Written
Chair.
testimony, I hate to ask, but it is so helpful. We
Yeah.
refer to it later.
I completely understand.
And it's great to just keep a paper trail of our conversations and our work.
Absolutely.
So
I will work on getting you something in writing.
thank you so much. All right, Lisa.
Okay. For the record, Lisa Gobbin, contractor with JFO, the IT. So what I wanted to talk to you about are the implications of the changes, mainly around the bespoke piece of the movement of the oversight of the bespoke dollars, the authority of the bespoke dollars back to the agency. The first thing I wanted to talk about was just the standards. I know when this came up, there was concern whether or not this could result in lack of involvement of ADS in decisions on specifically how a project is managed, what deliverables are paid for, et cetera. So, and I had an email conversation with Stacy, the head of the Enterprise Project Management Office, to confirm my understanding. The project management standards that are used by ADS include standards for deliverable acceptance, as well as all areas of a project. So when a project starts, all of the key business leads, IT leads across the project are identified. And as you work through the project and their involvement of the project, they're depending on what the deliverable is. If it's a deliverable that relates to business requirements, the business lead always signs up on the deliverable. So how it typically works is the project manager thinks, hey, I think a deliverable has been met. They take the deliverable, they actually have a paper trail. They go to a business person, the business lead usually, and say, hey, do you agree that this has been met? They look at it and they're like, yeah, we did the testing, everything's clear. I'm going to sign off on it. If there's a technical component, they go to the appropriate technical lead that can sign off on that. They actually get a sign off. And then also, depending on the size of the project, you may have the sponsor, which could be Secretary Riley Hughes or a commissioner of an agency also sign off on a deliverable. I remember doing this when I was in state government, walking into the CFO's office, sitting down and talking about deliverables and how they've been met, and then would sign off on it. The bill could be paid. So I don't see any changes for how the projects, who eventually is paying the bill, impacting the standards on how it is. And this is whether it's a project that's managed by an employee of ADS and the project management office, or if it's a contract, or if it's one of these projects that now was moved, where the bespoke projects where they've moved back to the agency. I don't see any changes in the standards for acceptance for this at all. So I don't see a risk there. Around oversight, there was some concerns, could this impact the availability of information on the dashboard? And I did speak to John Kelly about this, and that was one of his concerns. But then, I had kind of one of those wait a minute moments where I went back to the dashboard and looked as far as the financial information, what's tracked on the dashboard is the initial estimate of the implementation cost. So when it's in the planning stage, and then the current estimate. So that's after, you might have it either when the implementation phase begins, where we start to track some of those projects. It's updated, and it's possible later on if there's change orders, which are run by the project manager, that have dollar amounts, that amount could be increased. But the dashboard doesn't track how much has been paid on the invoices. So it's really tracking estimates, the budget, not the expenditures. So I don't see any impact on the dashboard based on this change. And I tend to, for the projects that I'm observing, that I've reviewed, I typically keep track of the change orders just from time to time. I'll ask the project manager, can you send me any change orders that I haven't executed? That sort of thing. But I'm not routinely updated with expenditures. I watch the project plan, are deliverables being met? Are we on track? That sort of thing. So I don't see any changes in terms of the information available to oversight through the dashboard. Around what we might get out of this change. When I first heard about this change, it seemed more like an internal Vermont oversight decision, that within the executive branch. But I also think it could be an opportunity. When Commissioner Gretchen was here, he mentioned that he would be talking with his staff about changes to the chart of accounts that could really help them track IT projects really deliberately. It might be worth considering sending a letter to Commissioner Gresham, reiterating that request, but also asking if there's a way at the same time they could try and track associated direct business cost projects, because that's something that we typically haven't received from ADS. So that would be, the cost of like on the ERP project, they have the business process reengineering contractor that's being paid directly by AOA, and ADS considers that a business expense, but I included it in my review and my budget as a cost. It would be great if we could have a more systematic way of tracking that information. And I've also heard from leaders across different agencies in the state, when I talk to them about projects, say, wow, it'd be great if we knew business costs, because those aren't tracked as part of the project cost too. So it might be an opportunity not only are we not losing anything from the dashboard, but maybe it's an opportunity to improve the way reporting's done. So that, if you are interested in doing that and you would like some language, perhaps to include that request, just let me know.
I was just thinking that.
Okay, and also I can provide this testimony in written form and I can send it to you so you have it as a record.
Also helpful.
So my question, I thought you asked some really great questions the other day when you were speaking with Secretary Bradley Hughes about what were the substantial changes from last year to this year in the budget? What was the impact service delivered? What's the impact on your service delivery? And also what's the impact on the agencies? I'm not sure if you've received the answers to that, but please let James and I know if you need assistance tracking some of that information down. I know you have to write your letter to the Appropriations Committee, and we want to make sure we're able to help you.
Yes, I do have to write that letter. And yes, I do need some assistance in tracking down that information.
So, okay, so we can reach out on that.
Great.
Is there any questions?
Just to drive another nail in this coffin. So ADS is not losing any substantial transparency into the management of state IT through these changes. Is that accurate?
I can't speak for Secretary Riley Hughes, but I can speak to the information that this committee receives and the project management standards that are used to oversee the project. I don't see any additional risk in the chance of incorrect deliverable being signed off on. It's still managed by them to their standards, and they have great standards.
So spending authority for bespoke projects will now appear in the agency budget, right? And that spending authority would include the cost of the project, would cover the cost of the project. So if it's a $20 million complete overhaul of whatever system, that $20 million would show up in some year's budget, right? In a fiscal year, in the first fiscal year budget, and then will be spent over whatever the time frame of that project is. Is that correct? And if it turns out that the project is a $100 million project, and the administration and the legislature decide to pay for that over a course of years, then that spending authority will keep appearing over multiple years.
Yes, and I remind you that there is the annual report that does attempt to break down the costs of projects across time, across the years. So it's a 5-year project. They make an effort to break that up. It never aligns exactly because you have some deliverables that kind of move around. But that's a good resource, and it might be a good exercise to look at something like CCWIS, another conversation. What is happening with that project and budget? And there wasn't a request for that project. There wasn't a budget request for IE&E, and yet I know there's those projects are supposed to move forward. And the question I would have, and maybe that relates to after the March break, how are those projects moving forward? Because that's really.
So I'm really I haven't been on transportation to the whatever they call it, the green one or the white one or something or other that AOT provides, showing the status of a bazillion road projects, and this and whenever the spending authorization was issued, they show the status of it and what the projected completion date is, and how much it is going out this year and stuff like that. Is there something like that for these projects?
Well, I think the annual report once a year that's updated where you can see what the proposed spending across time is and when those, if the dates have changed in the dashboard. But we could try and look at pick a project or two and track where we can find the information and when it's available. That might be a useful exercise.
Yeah.
In terms of oversight. So I can start on that too.
Well, we agree to have a summary,
Yeah,
of where everything is.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
All right. This has been super helpful. Always grateful to JFO. Great. So thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry about that.
No. I believe our next guests have entered.
Yes, we have, Madam Chair.
All right.
We have.
We're not going to take a break. Everybody okay with that?
Let's go.
Great. So, yeah.
Don't break.
Okay, so
Hi.
we have already this morning introduced ourselves for the record, and I think you know us. So we'll just ask folks who are in the room to introduce themselves, which is, you've already introduced yourself.
Isaac Archer, legislative intern for Senator Priestley.
Super.
And Jane Gilbert, South Rogan.
Great. All righty. So we are turning our attention from the FY27 budget to Whiplash, H727, an act relating to sustainable data center deployment. And we are joined by some new people. For the record.
For the record, my name is Carrick Johnson. I am currently Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Service.
And I'm TJ Poor, Director, Regulated Utility Planning, at the Public Service Department.
Great.
So what we, sorry, I was going to give TJ some love right off the bat, but let's get right into it. What TJ and I thought would make the most sense is, this is the first time I've talked to this committee, Madam Chair, regarding data centers. And I thought just a quick kind of view what we've been up to in this regard, because we've been busy.
That'd be really helpful
And
because
kinda-
we're just getting
Yeah.
started.
So I'll cut to the chase on a couple of things. Thank you for doing the legislation, because I think we may disagree on the exact language of the outcome, but this is something we're going to need to further explore. We're going to need, again, foreshadowing. How do we make sure we're protecting all ratepayers, even as we harness, as we leverage exactly the value that this can bring to the system? At least that's our department's view. So I'll hit some general stuff that I want to make sure you're aware of. And then TJ will go more specifically into some of the things I'm going to touch upon, including some specifics on the bill. So I trust that makes sense. Good. So one, I've been engaged at the regional, national level, trying to first understand what are data center developers, what are they looking for? And so the things distilling down, and I'll also say, we'll get into this a little bit, data center proponents, advocates, hyperscalers, and the like have really evolved in terms of their comportment, their permitting political strategy. In the last 16 months, it has evolved incredibly. And we'll get into that a little bit. But for right now, what are they looking for? Inexpensive energy, reliable grid performance, strong fiber network communications. When you think about it, that makes sense. And an expeditious, predictable permitting process. Now, I'll let you all decide how Vermont ranks in those, win those categories. And people can disagree. I would say that, and I just checked this morning with the key leaders of utilities, anyone kicking the tires on any data centers right now. There was the one I was aware of, I don't think it's telling anything out of school, was in the St. Albans area, and that has since evaporated. So there is no, as far as I know today, sitting here, Madam Chair, there is no active data center that's even just nascent proposal to date that I'm aware of that's being proposed for the state of Vermont. And as I said, the posture, though, for the data center industry has really changed. It was, here's how much energy I want, here's the cost I'm going to pay, and I want it yesterday. Now, after the firestorm and things that have happened, the new posture, two examples, if the committee, and happy to provide these, Madam Chair, to the committee. Google had, I don't know if you had seen this, their capacity commitment framework. It's essentially they have 5 pillars, and again, I can provide this,
Sure.
where they talk about, and it's kind of the things, to tell you the truth, it's things that the proposed bill gets to. They're saying, here's our commitments. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay our own. There's a whole series. I won't repeat all of them, but I'll just tell you that's notable. The first company to do that, though, wasn't Google, was actually Microsoft. Coincidentally, theirs is called the Community First AI Infrastructure Plan. Community First AI Infrastructure Plan. And they have the 5 commitments. Now, have they actually been held to those? Exactly, we'll see, because this is the new political posture, the new advocacy strategy for these major players. So generally speaking, now that they've set that bar, it kind of sets the bar for where the other hyperscalers and what's happening. So that's happened just like, say, in the last 6 weeks. So things just the point here is things continue to evolve. For our department, what I was seeking to do was tell me what happens if an application comes right now. How are we protected right now? And then, okay, what's our longer term kind of exposure and what could we do depending what we find out right now in the technical sense right now? TJ will get into this, but the bottom line in here is we have sufficient regulatory mechanisms to ensure protection of Vermont ratepayers right now. However, they absolutely could be strengthened, and likely they should. But I want to be clear. We see that the mechanisms are in place to look out for Vermonters. So I think to the degree the Vermont public is reading a lot about data centers, there is experience with dealing with large loads, and that's effectively what they are. There's there's decades of regulatory experience dealing with large loads, ski areas, some notable industrial and commercial developments. I listened to a little bit of the testimony from GMP and heard there. TJ shared with me, I think it's Tariff 10, is that what? One of them.
70. Right?
70. Yeah, it's really close. Tariff 70. So we have experience with this, but importantly for our role, our department, protecting ratepayers, we see, okay, if something was to come right now, there is no place you can just kind of escape and sneak in and get a permit. That's not going to happen. So that's where we are. We did yes. Okay, sorry. So we began a review in, I'm sorry.
I have a couple questions before we move on, and you might get to this later. I just want to voice out loud that my sense of faith in the commitment frameworks of the hyperscalers is like 0. So I just want to get that on the record. But my other question is, when you say that DPS, that we're protected right now and that we have sufficient regulatory mechanisms to protect Vermont ratepayers, does that mean that your focus is sort of singularly on grid and the price of electricity? Because I've got concerns about these data centers that go way beyond that, like environmental impacts and water use and stuff. So my question is, how broad is your lens?
Great, very fair question. So I would say the phrase that I frequently use: first, secure the perimeter on rates. That's our lane, the department's lane. So that was our primary focus. But based on the team's, I think, talents and history in my own career, and of course, we would look at it all. Now, to be clear, that leads to some other concerns, which I'll come on to. I absolutely take your point about how much faith, and let's see what results in the comportment of these hyperscalers in various regulatory jurisdictions. Having just come from Washington and the National Association of Regulated Utility Commissioners, I got back late Tuesday night. This was the two main topics. 3, affordability, resiliency, resource adequacy, and data centers, which exacerbates item 1 and item 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is the function. So everyone is right now focused on that. What does this mean? What can we trust? What are the best mechanisms? Where are the lessons learned? Which will lead to a recommendation, Madam Chair, that we have, that TJ and have going forward. So point taken, we started with rates, but we're very aware, and we asked ourselves, who's going to ensure the protection of some of the dimensions that you talked about? And thankfully, this is what happened. Well, foreshadow. Thankfully, what I would say is we have some experience from our colleagues in the surrounding New England states. I think I've said before that, I've worked with 7 commissioners prior to taking this role, and I have never seen the level of cooperation and collaboration like it is right now in the region. That's not just me. If you get the opportunity, ask any commissioner from any of the other New England states. It's actually incredible. In this context, what's happening is Massachusetts is kind of a poster child of pain for data centers in Lowell. Both Massachusetts and Connecticut, according to NCSL, there are 2 of 37 states that have passed incentive legislation to lure data centers to their states, which what's happened is a lot of times you'll have economic development officials who will push for passage of incentives, but the energy people in the same administration, shall we say, are much more sanguine as to the benefits of data centers. And so I've seen that dynamic take place. The point is, we are now being informed by what's already happening in New England. So a couple of things there.
What?
Mhm.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Yep, I'm sorry,
So
taking notes.
And I think the chairs really started to capture my concerns.
Yeah.
So rates, reliability. I mean, we heard from GMP. So stop, roll back. Have you had any discussions with Secretary Moore about this?
Secretary.
Agency of Natural Resources?
Oh, sorry. I think of Jules. Sorry.
Yes.
I just spaced. Yes, and Secretary Curley for economic development reasons.
Yeah.
So everyone kind of understands their lane. We're kind of on point in that because the first kind of regulatory stop typically is in the electric regulatory field. That's where we're at. But I would say not really of any depth. I mean, it's like, okay, this is coming. We got to make sure that we are connected. And here again, in the conversations with Massachusetts, and here's what we learned about water, noise. I mean, and actually having had my past with Velco and understand when you're citing transmission, and linear projects, wetland, threatened endangered species.
Linear.
Transmission line, right? It's a
Linear? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I know.
My point is I'm very aware. We've had initial conversations, but I don't want to, and that's how I characterize it. So I wanted to make sure, in fact, that I would be able, if I was asked this question, to be able to say exactly what I said.
Okay, that's great. And hopefully we'll be able to hear from ANR soon, particularly on water issues. ACCD is a new dimension that I hadn't considered, certainly had not considered any kind of incentives, Commissioner. I wonder if we have to think about that as well.
You should.
Okay.
I may suggest that you should, with respect, of course.
I mean, we have very few economic incentives, so it's hard for me to imagine something like this would qualify for veggie or.
We used to give people $10,000 to move here.
That's from moving here. That's
I'm kidding.
yeah.
Well, back to this issue, I would say that given the experience I know has happened in other states, so for instance, in Massachusetts, they now have enacted where a data center developer is relieved of any of the sales tax on energy or any materials used in the construction of a data center. The energy regulators weren't aware. Apparently, this is all stuff I found out about the other state. Every 2 years in Massachusetts, they do an economic development piece of legislation. Massachusetts, their legislative process, it sometimes gets late into June and July, apparently, and that was in the bill. They didn't know, and lo and behold, it's there. So now they're playing. That was, I guess, 2 years ago. Now there's supposed to be another omnibus economic development bill, and they're seeking to rein in or inform or get more from. If you're going to get this, then you owe us this data center. So that's why I started with economic development, because that's where, in my experience, where the most dysfunction, where the least communication had happened. So I actually started with the economic development folks even before talking to Secretary Moore. So that's what, and in fact, I just confirmed again this morning. I said, I just want to make sure I'm testifying in House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. This isn't anywhere on any priority 4, so it's nowhere on the list. So
thanks for all your work on this.
Yeah.
Also, I guess I should dial back and say, so
Well,
thank you.
I mean, to your point.
Yeah.
You're,
I got a couple of things there too. So one is these projects would go through Act 250, right? So
Some.
Some,
well, there's a couple ways to get to yes, which TJ and I will get to.
okay, good. I want to hear
Or
about that.
excuse me, there's a couple ways to for a couple ways to get a decision. There's a couple paths that can be taken depending on if you're connecting to at the distribution sub-transmission level or or straight transmission level.
Okay, looking forward to hearing about that. And then the other thing I hope you're going to talk about is the impact of incentivized data centers in Massachusetts on ISO New England power.
Excellent point, and yes,
And how what impact that has on Vermont.
I'm only going to give you one compliment. Yes, an excellent point, and yes. So I would say that. So some of the stuff I think we've already covered. I did the immediate, then the longer term, and I already gave you the conclusion. So to your point, Representative Campbell, regional review, and probably because I'm really fortunate and blessed to have the team that we have at the department, and the relationships and experience and insights. I viewed my role as there's a couple ways that what happens regionally really matters to Vermont. So maybe there's going to be no data center proposed for Vermont. Really, any data center of any really size, Vermont needs to be kept aware of because of the impact, really, say, two areas. One on infrastructure costs. Is it going to drive regional network service, RNS rates up, which I see nodding of head, so we'll pay. If it's driving reliability related investments, Vermont will pay 4% of that. I'll just also say in that regard, Massachusetts, the initial study they did, okay, what might be the impact? I asked specifically on, do you know exactly have any directional or any kind of ballpark figure for the impacts on RNS rates? One, importantly, no, that's a really good question, and we'll have to run that down. It's a very initial study that was done like 4 or 5 months ago, before they started developing legislation for this session. They don't know yet. So there's, again, two areas. One, what's going to happen to the infrastructure charging rate, the regional network service, which Vermonters will have to pay. Two is wholesale power costs. The region isn't long on power. They say we are, in the summer, fair. But as we have just experienced, when it's deeply cold for long periods of time, this system is not incredibly well built to serve that, and it leads to issues.
And also very exposed to fossil fuel prices.
Exactly right. And I think there's something like 20 million gallons of fuel that was burned just over one weekend, because those are the sources to keep the lights on and keep people warm and safe. So the point is, we have some constraints already. We already have rising RNS regional network service rates. Where does this fit in? Thankfully, the good news is all the region, we're collaborating. What can we do here? We need to watch this. Is there a specific solution yet? No. There's two things that are going on. So I already told you about that Massachusetts already passed their proposal. So that's another thing that can accelerate the need to get our act together on this. I think Connecticut also passed incentive legislation, and there it kind of surprises me, because not only did they relieve data center developers of sales tax on the various materials and the like that are used to construct it, they also relieved them of the requirement to pay property taxes. So I thought, why would a town? I mean, I didn't get it, but they were like the first out of the gate in New England to do that. They don't yet have a handle, and I'm not sure what kind of data center there. Honestly, right as I sit here, I don't know if there's any data centers actively being pursued in Connecticut. I am aware there's like 2 gigawatts of projects that are at least being considered. No ability to share with you, because the Massachusetts regulators themselves currently have no ability to determine the true viability. I mean, is this real or is this a phantom project? Don't know yet.
In terms, you said in Massachusetts, they're
Yeah.
looking at kind of scaling this incentive down. Are you aware of that in Connecticut? Any
No.
efforts in that regard?
Excuse me, I'm just, again, my homework for today Connecticut now is developing legislation, but I just found out about it last night. I don't know exactly
To
what.
scale down,
I would say more, better, protect.
more better protect.
More.
I like
I'd
it.
say,
I
well,
like it.
more and
I like it.
fair enough.
It's good.
Well, I don't want to miscarry as scaling down. I think they're trying to moderate the come here, the incentive stuff to get, again, something more in response.
Careful. Yeah.
Rev Morrow?
I have a very basic question.
Yeah.
Why would any data center want to locate in the highest priced market in the country?
I think that is an excellent question, which is why I led with here's the kind of like 4 kind of screening criteria that some have. I could see a case where if a data center said, look, we have a bit more time. Well, first I would say this, and this is not my thought, but I heard it Tuesday, and I thought, boy, that's something for us all to consider. The rise in loads, the rise of this industry has been seismic in its impacts, but it is so narrowly focused. It is so interdependent. It's this one industry that's driving all this rise. There could be a seismic drop in load because it's such a dynamic, innovative field. For instance, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, announced now, like 6 weeks ago, hey, guess what? Our new generation of chips, we're not going to need to cool it with water. We're not going to need cold water to cool it. That is 30% of the energy need of a given data center. Now, that will take time to work through and get into what particular data center is being built. The only thing I could see that would, the one appeal perhaps, and I'm not a data center developer, could be, if you're looking bluntly for the cachet of Vermont, like it's a renewable, much more climate conscious state. And so we're going to, I could, right? We'll build our facility in harmony with Vermont's working landscape and leverage, I could see the phraseology, but these people are serious business people, though. So I think it's very unlikely, but I also think there's some, for here in Vermont, even maybe for the region. But I think there's not here, but there's a willingness, I think, in some of the southern New England states to cut more favorable deals. Bluntly, just as they have a greater raft of incentives for economic development generally, they're willing to sacrifice a bit more on some of the things you identified, water quality, other community impacts. For the sake of that, I could see a similar kind of special contract or something or the like that would be executed with there in some of the states. I don't necessarily see it like that. Well, sorry, TJ.
Yeah, just the only other thing I would add, and I'm also not a data center developer, as you know, but New England, like, what is it known for, especially like the Massachusetts, Boston area, right? World-class research, medical research, education, right? To the extent that those industries are building up their data needs, there could be some nexus of siting a data center close to that as it gets closer to Vermont. Is it Dartmouth, UVA? I don't know. I'm throwing out those names. I have no knowledge of anything happening at those, but just that those kinds of industries could be a draw in theory for a data center to locate.
I think that's an excellent point. Also, like Hartford, the insurance industry in Connecticut, for instance, which is why out of this whole discussion, I've become aware, I didn't know, there's like 20 or so data centers right now already in Massachusetts for precisely the reasons that DJ. Yeah, tiny bubble one, like 20.
Do you have smaller?
Yeah, exactly right. Okay. So the other thing that's going on at the state level, given these concerns over RNS, rising RNS regional network service rates and the impact on the wholesale power market it's kind of, I would say, two-pronged. One, and I would characterize this, there's initial consensus. So Massachusetts and Maine and Vermont, I want us to have, again, regional conversation. Massachusetts and Maine have been wonderful. I think Connecticut is just busy. Rhode Island will come along, and New Hampshire, they have a more difficult time. The understanding is likely each state is going to enact exactly what's being considered, some kind of state legislation to better protect its individual state interest, rightfully so. but let's at least sure that they're in harmony with each other. Then we're not doing something that is diametrically opposed. And there's sort of, are we all in kind of moment? So everyone's kind of in, and that's essentially what we're working on. And that's part of the issue. The greater collaboration and cooperation we have among the 6 New England states, the greater alignment on data center related large load tariff kind of legislation, then we can turn to what is the role of ISO New England? And exactly what can the regional grid operator do to incorporate what might be coming into their planning process so we don't overbuild and we don't underbuild for, guess what, day-to-day reliability, because there's already absent data centers. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of modernization. There's a lot of electrification. As this committee's already heard, there's a lot going on already.
So, man, you are telling us we need really the states to have some better alignment in order for ISO to really be effective in this space.
I would, yes, but I would state it this way. My experience, the most effective way to get ISO to secure the most constructive role for ISO New England is to have the greatest amount of agreement on exactly what the states are accomplishing themselves and what they're asking of ISO. When the states are discordant and ask different things, I don't blame us. This is, we're all doing this. We would ask you, here's precisely what we're hoping the role you play. Early stages of that, ISO right now is begun at the urging of regulators, consumer advocates, and the like at the regional level. They are collecting anonymized data from the region's transmission owners. So you think Avangrid, National Grid, Eversource, Velco. I'm trying to think, am I missing anything? Rhode Island Energy. It's exactly what I just told you, the little bit of information I have from Massachusetts. Where are the data center? Where are you getting large loads that are saying, are you having conversations? Are there stuff going on? So there, it's like, typically those are the conversations are confidential, where you just saying, well, maybe I'll do that because you're trying to get access to the competitive, it's a competitive wholesale market the data centers want access to. Those are private commercial conversations. But the transmission owners have agreed to share that with ISO New England, and ISO New England will aggregate and then incorporate that information into their 2027 have to remember the name, capacity, energy, loads, and this doesn't come trippingly off my tongue. Capacity, energy, loads, and transmission. It's called the SELT report. That's an important, think of Velco's Vermont Long Range Transmission Plan, where a lot of things key off of that. This is a foundational document for the region. And the idea would be, okay, we know where we suspect we've seen as many as 15 gigawatts worth of data centers spread around New England. We're gonna discount that and maybe say we're gonna need an additional 3 megawatts in maybe capacity or stuff or energy we're going to need. Now that's going to have real world costs on all of New England's ratepayers, which is why the New England states are motivated to collaborate together, be clear on what our roles are, and then see exactly what our ask of ISO New England is and what kind of tariff changes, if any, need to be made.
Yeah.
Any discussion amongst the states about bring your own power?
Yes, absolutely. It's because again, this conversation takes place against the context of there's been such strong federal opposition to offshore wind. There's been alienation of the province of Quebec for energy. We just talked about the winter situation. Where are we going to get? Because Vermont, for instance, they've talked about if we meet our goals or come close to meet our goal, we'll go to a 2,000 megawatt load instead of 1,000 megawatt load. The rest of the region, roughly, you can just say as a rough directional, okay, if that's the case, where are we going to get those electrons from? So any and all electrons are the like. I will tell you, at least, and again, this is kind of ill-formed, but I am mindful that the strength of the grid has been, and I think Vermont has especially borne this out, especially compared to our neighbors, has been the shared experience, or we're all in, of a grid, but I can absolutely see great benefits. This is such a new, high volume customer that's going to have such huge demands and burdens on the system. It's almost like they could be required to bring generation. And that's what's going on. People say, should we require them to bring something to the party if they want to locate?
And as the bill sponsor, I will tell you, my thinking is evolving pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
That's where we need to go, particularly around emissions, which is something I hear
Yeah,
a lot
fair.
about.
Fair. I would also, I'll think it's in here. I would say what TJ and I have talked about is for a few months now is building in a requirement that you have to have the capacity and work collaboratively with the distribution utility in whose service territory you're located on flexible load management. Work to deliver, have some regulatory stricture that ensures that's, to me, I see that as one of the key tools to leverage any upside value. So, and there's different data centers, right? They're not all doing the same things. Training, they do training periodic. There's different creatures that are doing different. They're using different amount of electricity at different different times of the day. They have flexibility, ostensibly. So the thing would be, you are required to get to yes to work that out with your host utility as part of the requirements to get to yes.
But that is not bring your own. That is plugging into the.
It could. You're absolutely right. It isn't explicitly bring your own. It could be. We're going to have a. In Vermont, it could.
Only when there's.
Yeah,
But you're still plugging into mix.
Yeah, well, and also you could be your back to emissions. Like, this kind of goes to your question. The bring your own may be a massive diesel generator, or
Not Vermont.
Yeah.
well, I'm just saying the options for backup power in Vermont. I mean, you could go to where there is natural gas, like in Chittenden County and the like, avail themselves. But I see her. Yes, I understand. But I'm just saying, back to Representative Morrow's point, it's kind of a tough gig to get your meet and meet all the stuff.
I would know we have a large load in state that is compliant with the res and it's their own generator. That's what I think.
Yeah.
That's what I think about when I think about bring your own.
Yeah, and there's and that could be largely replicated, right?
Okay,
But-
time check.
Okay,
How are we doing with your testimony?
I'm gonna be done
with
right
your
now.
testimony? No, it's okay. We're not in a huge rush, but this is our committee.
well, I know, but it's time
So
for me to be done.
we never know what happens.
I would say, so then quickly, and this is, well, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a segue. I would say GPA is going to review in detail. We do support the PUC's comments.
Yeah.
But one other thing I really wanted to, and I have one more resource that I'll commend to your attention. It's Smarter Energy and Power Association, SEPA. If you haven't heard of this, I'll send it to Alex, a link to the website. It's a nice one-stop shop. Here's what's going on in every state. I think NCSL, they'll provide, generally speaking. This was the most user-friendly that I have seen, and it's updated. They're doing it in conjunction with a North Carolina educational institution. SEPA is a real reputable, kind of forward-thinking organization, and they have a map of large load tariffs, who's doing what, what's happening, and where you can click, and where it's a great resource. So I would commend that to your attention. Lastly, Madam Chair, and I'd like to say I thought of this. I did not, but I heard is that makes real sense. And I have already had an initial conversation with PUC Chair McNamara. And however this relates in the legislation, especially because we don't have an active data center application, now would be the time to have a technical conference to build a record of facts of what we know, what we don't know, where's the best kind of lessons learned from other states, what do we see happening to craft. So it isn't just, I see that as the best vehicle for putting into effect the most useful kind of regulatory protections that we could achieve.
Can you explain what a technical conference is or just define it?
Sure. And let's teach it. Here's how I understand it. Effectively, it's the PUC would issue, the department could request it. And then there would be could be some back and forth, including, we suggest these parties, we'd like a technical conference on data centers. And I'm thinking of the provisions of your bill that addresses these areas. And we're going to send it out, and we would have an idea of who to send it to. The PUC, all right, Vermont World, especially others, what do you think? Here's the agenda that we're thinking about. Does this make sense? How might this be improved? Then there could be some back and forth. There'd be comments on that. And then I've seen conferences where you've had, all right, phase one is this, phase two is that. And on this day, we're going to concentrate on the regional impacts. Here, we're going to go state impacts in the intersection with Act 250 or creation, replicating the global foundries and have an industrial or commercial customer data center creating its own utility. What's that like? So you're able to have on the record where people are, I don't know about the opportunity for I don't know that's cross-examined. I think it's basically people do presentations and there's Q&A presentations, and then you can have, here's what we heard, what we think. All you people attended, what do you think about your heard? Is there respond to that and see what you think? And then you're able, typically what happens, they do a summation of the proceedings. Here's what we've learned. A lot of times, or you could say, now that we've understand this better, we don't think anything needs to happen. In this instance, I think it would be happen. Now, based on the body of evidence we have, the review, we're going to suggest that we do these things. This could be by statute. I think even more likely, because TJ, when we were talking about flexible load management requirements, could be build your own. We can build that into a requirement, I think, through regulation. But you would nail that down so you have the proceedings, then you have the summary of the proceedings with recommended steps. I'm just looking for us to capture. There's places who are going through this now we can learn from, and I think you have a little bit of time to do this right because there is some upside. There could be some upside here.
Let's get,
Okay.
okay.
Oh,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. I'm bringing out the chopstick.
How much time do we have? I
Well,
looked
we
on the
really
schedule,
have
it was
until noon.
Okay.
Okay.
That should be
Did I
plenty of time.
Did I miss anything else? Nope. We have until lunch.
Okay, great. Noon is much more specific.
Yes.
Lunch could be tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, so we got a lot of good high level and regional picture from Commissioner Johnson. I'm gonna drill down a little bit into what is our current regulatory process and what for interconnection of large loads. Is this, data centers a large load? There could be other large loads, like a ski area could expand or yes, Bitcoin mining. Right. There could be other things. And so really our initial review showed that Act 250, Section 248 of Title 30 provide a lot of strong protections for Vermonters in Vermont. But as the commissioner said, there could be some clarifications or improvements to ensure that what we think are strong protections are like rock solid and really protect ratepayers, but also facilitate the opportunity for benefits to come to ratepayers. So currently, the data, I'll start really, we're focused on the electrical impacts and energy impacts, but I'll spread to other areas. A data center's load or any big load in Vermont must be served by an electric distribution company. You can't take service unless one of our franchise utilities actually delivers that power. So that's all covered under Title 30, covers the framework for electric utilities. And that is what where the Public Utility Commission gets its authority to regulate those utilities, issue certificates of public good, and that's required for utility operations, which include constructing, operating facilities. And so under 248, if a utility needs to build infrastructure to serve a load that will come under the Public Utility Commission's jurisdiction, they have to issue a certificate of public good. And that's true no matter if it's that load is served by at a distribution level, like a lower voltage power level, or the transmission level. Even if it's connected directly to Velco, it still needs to be served from a retail electric utility, which is not Velco. Velco does not provide that service. We'll start with the smaller ones first. So if loads are connecting to the sub-transmission level or the distribution level that's under 115 kV lines, kilovolt lines, right? That's an electric utility has to provide what's called an ability to serve letter. And so, a customer will come and say, hey, here's our facility, here's our expected electric draw. Can you serve this? The electric utility either says yes or no under that ability to serve, or it's yes, but we have to build a new substation, or yes, we have to upgrade these lines. And with those upgrades, the cost causer needs to pay, the customer needs to pay for that. And those, that letter, so with those upgrades, again, they'll go through the 248 process, but that letter is also used to support Act 250 permits. So Act 250 requires that a proposed development won't place an undue burden on existing services and infrastructure. There's a number of criteria under that, under Act 250. It's criterion 6 mentions educational service, but it's been read in practice to broadly mean all public services and infrastructure. Criterion 7 there relates to municipal services, and 9A is related to future infrastructure capacity. So like down the road, what is going to be needed? So if a utility can serve the load with or without those investments, then it'll do so through a tariff, either through an existing tariff or a direct contract. And so which is, it's kind of like a specific tariff. And really those tariffs, again, come through Public Utilities Commission jurisdiction and need to ensure that there's equitable contributions from the cost causer for all costs that they're causing. And so that tariff structure needs to get approved, and there's in approving that, the commission has to look out for all other ratepayers in that instance.
I have just a quick question. So if you, I realize this is hypothetical, but to me, what I'm taking away from that is that as long as some deep-pocketed data center developer was able to pay,
if they paid for all of the impacts of the, so then there are other criteria under 248. So it's not just the electric criteria. That's where I started. So 248 has a number of criteria like orderly development of the community, which looks to regional planning commission and municipal plans. There's aesthetics, there's water quality, natural resources. Those are the ones Agency of Natural Resources comes into the PUC process and testifies on those. And so it's not just the ratepayer impact.
Right.
248, it is some of those broader.
I just wanted to make sure I understood like that one particular impact on ratepayers. If I realize this is all, unlikely, but if Microsoft comes in and was like, well, the cost of the transmission upgrade is peanuts to us, here's your money. So then we fall back on the other criteria.
Right. And it so I'll get into this too, but one of the criterion in 248 is economic benefit. And so that would be broader to, in my mind, and I think this is a place for potential clarification. But as I read that, as we read that, and as we would advocate in the commission process, that would include, okay, these are going to have market impacts that, your generation, to your point earlier, Representative Campbell, this is going to affect the wholesale market clearing price or capacity prices. We need to evaluate that impact as well. So not just the transmission or the infrastructure interconnection impact. But that's, me saying that right now the department would advocate under the economic benefit criterion on that is an area that, I think it's strong enough for us to do that, but we could clarify that and improve that to make it explicit that those types of things need to be considered under that criterion.
So clarifying. So back, I think it was Title 30 with the cost causer.
Yes.
So are there any exceptions to that in terms of infrastructure? So mean, any
Oh.
infrastructure that these need, they would have to pay for what you're saying. Okay.
Right. So yes. And so the way that, just to be clear, the way that we look at that, say, okay, we need a new substation, or an increased size of substation, but this substation was going to be replaced in 6 years anyway. And so ratepayers were going to replace that substation. We want to do it now. So it would be the cost of advancing the time of when that substation was going to be reconstructed, and it would be the cost of increasing the capacity. But so some of the costs then, basically ratepayers would be held harmless in that effect, because we were going to, rebuild that substation in 6 years anyway. Ratepayers were going to pay for that, and that all the incremental costs would be covered.
Water as well, water infrastructure.
I don't know the answer to that question
Should
on
we
water.
ask?
I don't know if that comes under the 248 jurisdiction. I think we would argue that that would be part of the broader economic benefit criterion that would need to be paid for if you're requiring all these upgrades to water infrastructure, that it would need to, that would go into the calculation of economic benefit.
So just to,
I'm trying to think of who to answer your question of who you should ask. That could be the commission, I think, on 248, and Agency of Natural Resources on new water infrastructure.
Well, and as far as the process anyway, right?
Right.
for Act 250, yeah. So if we want to understand if there are any exceptions to the cost causer having to pay for the expanded infrastructure
I
on
think that-
water, we should talk to A&R and the commission.
yes.
Thank you.
We just add, Madam Chair, I think, right, when we say 248 versus 250, it's the same. It's just, isn't it difference to local plans? It's the same criteria, I think. Isn't it? It's like all the same.
Well, there's two different, so yes,
Okay.
yes, they're very similar, but there's the electric infrastructure and public infrastructure like water, water, that I think that side of it, Act 250 may even handle better. Might be the land use review board might be another good option to talk to. A data center, if it didn't need any electrical upgrade, right, no cost, then it still would need to go to Act 250 and through like the local zoning, and then that would need to be covered in Act 250. And I am not quite familiar enough with like Act 250 for general commercial construction, industrial construction projects to really speak much more than that on it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so distribution system went through for the transmission process for use of the if they are going through a current retail distribution utility. I talked about a tariff or a contract, right? And we mentioned earlier, Green Mountain Power has a contract that formerly Global Foundries was on. It's rate 70, and that's available. And that's for transmission interconnected projects. They take power directly from the grid. And again, those customers pay for upgrades to the transmission system necessary to serve their load. Or, and this, from who folks we talked to think this may be a more likely path for a data center if they were to connect to the transmission system, is they would apply to the commission to be a self-managed utility, like Global Foundries is. And if they do that, that also goes through the commission process under multiple statutes. 248 and 231, I think, is broadly speaking kind of a company's viability to be a good citizen in Vermont, essentially. And so the commission reviews those projects under those criteria.
And those are all subject to the res
Subject to
requirements.
Yes, well, I have to check. I believe the self-managed utility statute says that, but I know Global Foundries is,
Yes.
is subject to the res, yes. So the other thing that happens, when a large load connects to the transmission system, is that ISO New England needs to determine that there be no adverse impact to the transmission system. So there's a, or that adverse impacts are mitigated through necessary upgrades. And so that process is being worked out. When a large generator wants to interconnect, there's a very specific process that they have to go through. ISO as of today does not have that process for large loads. And that's part of what they're developing. So when a large generator interconnects, right, there's a very specific process that they have to go through to study the system, and to understand what the reliability impacts are. For load, that process is not defined by ISO New England right now. And so that process is, I think, the states, another thing the states are doing are urging ISO to like, okay, let's talk about this, define this process. I think that the thinking now is that ISO New England would probably apply a similar process as they do to the large generators, but it is not defined. And so that's like liability study. It actually takes some time, usually like a year for those studies. So it's not something that would like happen tomorrow. We do know that it would need to go through the, ISO New England would need to make a determination of the transmission level impacts.
Okay, I get my NEPOL and NESCO confused, but are those the organizations that is how the states talk among themselves and talk to ISO?
Yes, so New England States Committee on Electricity is NESCO. Commissioner and I are both managers of NESCO, and each state has representatives on that committee. And so we talk amongst ourselves, and NESCO often communicates with ISO either on our behalf or and files comments as kind of joint states comments. The states also talk with ISO, and we talk with ISO on our own and have meetings. Last month we met with a couple of board members, and so we have those conversations as well individually. NEPOL is a broader kind of framework that governs ISO New England, of which NESCO is a component of. And so NEPOL encompasses like transmission owners is a sector, NEPOL sector, and generators are a NEPOL sector, and public advocates. So, et cetera.
Sorry. I think NEPOL is the stakeholder process. There's votes. Here's what we're going to do. And so ISO will be there and say, okay, what does everyone think about this? And they vote on projects and so that's like the voting organization for every stakeholder. NESCO, funded through a tariff, so it gets direct funding from electric ratepayer. Very sophisticated analysis. They can file at FERC. They seek to work very collaboratively. What they try and do is distill hopefully one position on behalf of all 6 New England states and help represent that one position to ISO New England. So that is like the state's advocate within the broad ISO process.
Well, it's everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, talk about some of the risks. So we think the regulatory process is pretty well suited to address risks and in order to leverage the opportunity that could come, right? Opportunity is really if we can address all the risks, additional load could actually have decreased rate pressure and provide other community benefits. But that is a big if in that sentence, right? And so some of the risks that we're thinking about, and these will not get to some of the natural resource or water quality risks that you raised, which are definitely real and acknowledge those. We already talked about the regional network service charges, the impact on, if it has impact on reliability, more transmission build. Vermont pays 4% of that. Energy and capacity prices, right? So if the significant new loads could increase the marginal energy costs. Vermont is pretty well hedged, as we talk about in the short term, but those prices would eventually flow through to ratepayers, right? We're hedged for a certain time. Once a contract falls off, we have new prices, and that sets the basis for negotiating the next hedge. And so those eventually do flow through to prices for Vermonters. Also, I'll just say we're pretty well hedged, but when we get into a long cold snap and demand goes really high and maybe higher than we hedged for, then we are subject to those prices, that price risk. So there is some short-term risk, and then but it's not like other states see a short-term risk because we have the hedging mechanism. That upward pressure on energy and capacity prices, I'll say it separately here, but it includes the cost of meeting renewable portfolio, renewable energy standards. The same dynamic is there. If there's, we've seen in other states like Microsoft outbidding states or outbidding utilities for renewable projects, right? And so if there's that much more demand, that raises the price of the supply because the next project might cost a little more. And so it's not like a direct, you're not necessarily seeing that directly, but it's an impact that, if a data center brought it, said, hey, we're contracting for the wind that's going to be developed in northern Maine. And well, that wind's now not available for Green Mountain Power to buy. They have to go to the next higher price project.
And similarly with nuclear, I would encourage that.
Yes. Yeah. That's
So driving up.
just like
the
a supply and
cost of
demand
nuclear
dynamic,
as well.
right? Yeah. I would say that for any energy resource, even if we didn't have environmental standards, it would apply to natural gas as well. Right. Yeah.
Right. And improving markets for things like coal, perhaps.
The only, if I may, Madam Chair, the one thing I would add there is your point is incredibly well taken, because the leverage, like say in Connecticut, the leverage over, okay, Millstone, who are you going to sell to? And you have to deal with us as the elected officials. And that's like, well, fine, we've already extended to the NRC. We have another 30 years of operation. We'll talk to you about the offtake if you want to do a contract, but we have 3 people lined up who will take it all for the next 20 years at this price. So to your point, Representative Sebelius, it has fundamentally changed the negotiating kind of landscape of what's already that sort of happened.
Yeah, and really is starting to become like very clearly bring your own generation that complies with our res for New England.
Or
No, that she just mentioned it, that if they contract for Maine energy coming from whatever the source in Maine, it's going to affect the transmission system theoretically. Meaning, theoretically means that the real flow is going down toward the coast and Rhode Island. The electrons go in that direction. Where you have your contract and where you pay your wheeling charges for is sometimes a paper mache.
I don't want to. Yes, absolutely. That's a contractual arrangement. The grid reliability is grid reliability, and that's accounted for whatever the contractual arrangements are. I think we're just touching on a different facet of the same, to TJ's point. Every time there's more people who want the same energy, the price is going to go up.
Director Poor, how are we doing with your time and your testimony?
I probably have 7 more minutes of testimony.
Great, we're going to let you finish
Adding-
without any further questions.
Well,
Go ahead, and just everybody hold your questions.
okay. So two other risk, capacity, we just talked about regional reliability, capacity constraints, resource adequacy, right? Making sure, when the system is stressed, right? Do we have enough resources? We've in the past entered in, ISO New England entered into out of market contracts to, ensure that we have that supply. There's other markets that have been implemented that are actually really expensive right now. And it just kind of adds to that risk. And the other one I'll mention is stranded costs. And I think this is talked about in your legislation, and I was very happy to see that. And is if a data center comes and causes all this investment, and then they say, "Oh, whoops, we're bankrupt." Yeah, Velco has the right to like go after them, but are they really going to be able to? And so having some sort of collateral requirement or whatever, again, I think our regulatory structure as it's currently situated, could address these risks, but the types of things you have in the legislation, the intent of those, of clarifying that you must consider these things, is actually helpful. And so,
Wow.
all right, maybe I shouldn't have used
Never say that about
I gotta go.
No.
February
I
13th.
didn't even say the word.
Mark this down.
It's all been, it's all built.
So I also just note that we're subject to a lot of these risks, even if a data center locates outside of Vermont, right? And that's another reason why we're really working hard with VESCO and ISO New England to have some of that shared principles as we move forward and ensure risks are mitigated. Okay, so specific recommendations on the bill. First, I think we would a little more time to work with you on this to kind of hone in. Is we're not, we don't have like a red line right now. And I don't know if that's the next best step or just kind of general and go forward. But first, agreeing with the commission's recommendation that they provided in writing the other day, that utilities be required to enter into what might be termed like a large load service equity contract to ensure that that ratepayers are protected and that there's a clear regulatory process for large loads. And I say large load because I think this is all this stuff is relevant for any type of large load, whether it's a data center or not. And where the legislature could set the guidance and in a lot of the criteria that we've talked about that you have in 727 here could be that good guidance for utilities to go by, or for the commission to approve such a contract. They need to address all these things. And you could incorporate by reference or explicitly the 248 criterion in that, which, as we said, includes natural resources, water quality, and economic benefit could be specifically clarified to include those risks that we talked about, resource adequacy, impact on energy costs, contribution to the embedded cost of the system that we already have, that we've built to facilitate, new loads. Meeting the renewable energy standard, and also contributions to efficiency charges. Some of those things might seem obvious, right? But that gross receipts tax, those things could be considered, right?
Can you provide this in writing?
Yeah, I'll provide these.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
I was trying to scribble it down, but I
believe that was a question. I'm sorry. I'm here too often. I a little too.
This is good for me to watch.
I don't mean to be so casual. I'm sorry.
Give this guy a mug.
I know. God, once he got his mug.
Move in. Where's your seat?
Just give him a child pick.
Yeah.
Really importantly, so address the risk of stranded costs. We talked about two other things that we haven't consider requirements for load flexibility. That's a real option, I think, for the capacity piece, and or bringing your own generation. Specifically is, I'll just say consider that, and we'll go from there for now. The other thing is one of the things we've heard in other states is that, and I think this is less of a problem in Vermont because our utilities are vertically integrated, but transparency and contracting, that is, like I said, less of a problem here, I think, but something to think about. Other states with retail providers, they enter into a contract in NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and then regulators and public officials have trouble actually, understanding what the deal is and what the impacts are to ratepayers. So just another thing to add to that. All right. Couple other recommendations. Siting of the data center facility itself. This is another commission recommendation in writing that that part should remain in Act 250 jurisdiction, not be the Public Utility Commission jurisdiction. I'll just let the commission's comments stand there and say we support it. Commissioner talked about a technical conference. You could put that in the legislation to ensure it happens. I think it probably would happen anyway, but then a couple of other things. Just we want to further consider whether and the frequency and content of the reporting on data centers. There's some obligations in the current bill that come to the department and to data centers, and not against reporting at all. We do lots of reporting and for good use, but I just want to ask for more time to kind of review that part of it. And then we have some concern about the section 288 that is the intent that will kind of tax this particular sector of the economy and use that specifically for other purposes and pull that tax out of the general funds. We haven't maybe you have, but we haven't connected with I haven't connected with my counterparts in ACCD and tax and to kind of talk about that. But there's some concerns about the signal that it sends to development in general, and then whether it's any sort of large load, and then how that really would be structured. And I know it's kind of a study, but I just want to flag that today and maybe come back to talk about that more. If that makes sense.
And gross receipts is listed as one of the.
Right. So the ensuring that they're kind of taxed appropriately is one thing, and then using that tax for a specific or having an additional tax, using it for a special purpose that just raises some flags.
Yeah.
So that's the last thing. I think we look forward to working more on this. I think there's a lot of good things here and a lot of good intent. So hope to work.
I have sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Specific question hasn't been mentioned exactly, and maybe it doesn't have to be, but talking about bring your own power. There's also I call it transmission upgrades or infrastructure upgrades along those lines. Is existing practice that the cost causer pays, would that apply to a data center also if it required transmission upgrades?
Yes.
So that's why we
Yes.
haven't mentioned.
Yes.
Okay.
Same principles apply.
Yeah.
And the generation there, I believe that size of generator would go through the 248 process regardless on its own, just the generator.
Right.
So,
But
yes, and in that process, if there's associated distribution or transmission upgrades necessary to, facilitate reliable, safe interconnection of the
Right.
generator, those would be part of the generator has to pay for that, and so the cost cover pays.
And what I was getting at was Commissioner's point about RNS impacts, regional network service impacts. Presumably, that would be covered by that as well. Is that true, or is there sort of a limit?
I think
how
there
far
is.
the ripples go.
Yeah, there is a limit to how far it goes. I think it's the the direct impacts to safely get the power out, but then ISO New England looks at the regional needs and power system flows.
Yeah.
I think you'll hear a little bit of that from Velco this afternoon or this week. And then they say, okay, now a new project. This caused a new project in New Hampshire to need to be built, or load is such, and you can't really, ISO doesn't peg that on one particular load. They say load altogether.
Yeah.
But even more, the TJ is exactly right. But I would say, Representative Campbell, there's two things. One is, okay, we're going to need these additional wires, these additional assets to actually safely interconnect your power. Okay, you got to pay for that. Right. But there's also, once it's in service, there's a cost that is reflected to keep it like in maintenance, and think of it as overhead. And that isn't just that one customer. So you're generally, just like we're talking about, you're raising the price for wholesale power. You're generally raising the overall cost just to keep the system running. So in addition to the build cost, there's this ongoing operational cost because it becomes part of the $5 or $6 billion annual cost to run the region's grid. Maybe it's 8 now. Hey, just to be clear, so there's two.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have a question, Rick Howard?
Yeah, so what happens if you bring your own power? You have a demand of 25 megawatts, but you have a load 80% load factor, so you got 5 megawatts left over. Rate 70 doesn't talk about energy going back to the utility. Would that require some sort of a contract, or so to bring your own doesn't mean bring most of what you need, but don't bring all of what you need?
I think that the power going out would just be, they could either one, contract with the utility for it, or they could just enter it into the wholesale marketplace, right? And so there'd be a couple of options for.
They would then be a generator also, the two contracts.
But to TJ's point, I would view it much more likely. I think if you talk to Global Foundries now that they understand, boy, when you're your own utility and player and all the paperwork and stuff that happens, my guess, Representative Howland, in that instance, they would much prefer to deal with the utility and just have a straight transaction. If we'll provide these megawatts, give you a heads up, here's when we're going to be able to deliver power, and or if it just comes, here's what we'll do between us. So they don't have to get into the power supply market, the regional, do all the stuff that's required there.
Clarification, man.
Mhm.
So in that instance, are we still talking about having on-site generation?
Oh, I think that's what we were talking.
Yeah.
That's, okay, right.
If I wasn't.
Slightly different model than what we're seeing with Global Foundries is what I'm hearing.
Oh.
So like you would have,
Well,
that's a question,
yeah.
Commissioner. You
Right.
understand what I'm asking?
Yeah,
So
so
they're their own
you got that.
utility right now.
Yeah.
And what I think you're saying is we could improve upon that. So, and
Well-
I'm hoping there's renewable generation on site
I would think
and that
that
improvement.
if you want to get to yes, you're going to go with renewable generation in Vermont. If you want to get to yes, it's likely what I was actually referring to, since I know that Global Foundries saw, and credit to them, saw great value from following the strides that they did to be their own essentially utility. But the full panoply of requirements from participating in becoming that, I'm just saying that if you become a generator and you want to play in markets, and they can skip over the local utility you could deal with, instead of do that, I would say most of the data, in my judgment, most of the data says, okay, they would eschew that much more complicated path and simply try and work an agreement out with the local utility. That's all.
And if I could just, if we're talking about generation on site and talking about, it seems unlikely to me that we're going to have enough renewable generation on site in order to support like a more than 20 megawatt load of a data center, which if you think about it, if it's a really high load factor, so it's operating at 18 megawatts every hour, most hours, right? Okay, so that's maybe 150 megawatts of solar in order to provide all that energy, or, you
With
know,
a battery.
or long duration batteries, maybe a little less solar with long duration batteries, or it's a big, that's a big scope of a project, right? Maybe they site on the Connecticut River next to a dam, right? So there's definitely other options, but when I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, they're not going to put up. Are they going to site in Lowell under the turf? I don't know. That brings up a whole host of other issues, orderly development and et cetera. So it's hard for me to envision it being on-site renewable generation as opposed to maybe we're gonna build this new plant somewhere else that's renewable to directly support this. But I don't know. Maybe my imagination might not be broad enough, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
I would just add, Madam Chair. No, I think you're hydro. That's exactly where I went. Something like that. The more I think about this, practically speaking, where might they go? I think you heard from GMP, as I heard it was, well, we could go somewhere in southern Vermont. Really, for me, is given there's other higher costs in operating in Vermont, where might you save money? Seems to be, okay, Vernon, where you have existing electrical infrastructure, you have an upgraded railroad siding, you have some of the assets in place that might buy down the cost you would have to incur from other places. If it were to happen, and I've seen nothing yet that says it will, but if it were, to me at least, that's the most likely place that we're talking about. In response to your question.
So,
Yes.
I have a final question, which is that hearing your testimony and hearing what feels to me like some gaps or moments of pause, like, ISO has some things that aren't quite ready, and our regulatory structure is pretty good, but there's some things we need to shore up. I wonder, and this isn't the direction this bill contemplates, but we need to have a technical conference. I wonder about the other idea that's been kicking around, which is just a moratorium. That we want to get the New England states together, and we're not together. So why not just put a moratorium on these in Vermont until we can get ready and make sure that if one ever wants to come here, it has no negative impacts. Because I'm super concerned about the negative impacts.
And thank you for the question. It's an absolutely legitimate question. But be clear, I think what both TJ and I said was, we view the existing regulatory process as absolutely sufficient, that they could adequately protect Vermonters. Does that mean that
No, I'm just not sure if I agree.
Fair. I apologize, but I'm just trying to make sure. I wasn't sure if you were recapitulating our testimony. For what it's worth is we think these are sufficient. We don't think just if you're going to try and get to yes in Vermont building a data center, there's not going to be any free lunch, and I think there's adequate protections. ISO is on it, but they take time. So you're right about that. I guess at least my reaction to a prohibition is I don't want 100%. I think we have sufficient capacity here. Since I've been doing this now for a year and 2 months, I keep looking for ways that we can try and change the equation for what I see happening in the longer term trends we're on. There's risk associated with data centers. There's no question. But I also think there's not a whole lot of opportunities and options for Vermont to grab some additional value to be able to build the grid we need to meet the res and other requirements we have if only Vermonters are paying for it. And it'll still be difficult if it's just Vermont and New England ratepayers are paying for it, given the other costs are coming at the region. So I at least see the opportunity and other states have experiences. I mean, we've shared the negative situations, but I've also heard positive, and now some of it is negative, but Georgia, Kansas, other places where they have leveraged data centers to get the kind of infrastructure built that otherwise just would have been a cost solely borne by ratepayers. And if you put it all together, the possibility of value, the likelihood that we'll get something, primarily first the safety net, I would say, in the sufficient regulatory proceedings, kind of where we're at, which I think is a very positive place. The interest of this committee, and thank you. And data centers read these things. They're looking at where we want it. I mean, they're not looking to parachute into a hostile territory and try and take stuff over. I would just prefer we adopt the approach where it isn't just no, it is understand what we have these existing and we continue to move and improve our game as we need to and continue to learn from the region. I'm trying to think of other jurisdictions I'm aware of that are pursuing prohibitions. The only places that I've seen actual well, no, that's not true. There are some states that are pursuing prohibitions. If the committee wants to go there, fine. It just for I would say our department's position is we would prefer not to go that way.
So are you saying we need nothing? We need improvements to the bill?
What I'm saying is, as we said right at the outset, we have sufficient, but could they be
Yeah.
improved? Yes, just to make absolutely
Yeah.
sure. I think every stakeholder involved in these kinds of issues would benefit from the technical conference and then whatever comes of that. I think the legislation, some of the things you're talking about, and especially with bring your own generation and the clarity around some of that. If you're going to have like what do we call it for the country? What was that term?
Oh, man, I need it. Large load service equity contract.
Yeah, large load service equity. What should be the components? What should comprise the elements of that? I think that could be a logical statute. Just as we're getting going, because we could pull off the technical conference, hell, but I mean, that could happen like in May or June. Let's get going. Ed totally agrees. Love the idea. Let's get going on that. So I'm not saying we're going to hold off. If anything, I want to continue to make reasonable progress, continue to collaborate with the states. So that's why I say in lieu of a prohibition. That's
Victoria?
I was just curious, would you need an appropriation to do the technical comments or would that fit in existing PUC?
great question.
Well, we have a budget letter that we're working on.
Yeah,
We're asking
great.
things.
It sounds rather involved.
No,
but
let me be candid, okay? Yes, it'll involve the expense of resources. I think as you heard from TJ's and my
You're
testimony,
doing it anyway.
we're essentially doing it anyway. And honestly, I would view this as a preemptive investment in that we either invest some of our time and resources now in this way for a technical conference to continue to do the work at the regional level, or we can spend a whole lot of money, right, having to respond and us hiring lawyers to respond and do the like. So great question. Thank you. And fundamentally, our budget ask is baked. And I'm not really in a position to ask for any more money. Thank you for asking the question.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the, this is good. This is
Yeah.
good.
All right.
All right.
Great.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
We can go off live.